Hey folks, Rob Flux here from Property Developer Network, coming to you for another Sunday session. Now, for those of you, who are regular listeners, you'll notice that my voice is a little raspy. That is because we just celebrated our 9th birthday for Property Developer Network yesterday, and I am a little dusty, to be telling you the truth. That said, going to be putting on a really good show for you today. Today's episode is a little bit different. For many of you who've been following me for several years, you'll know that I regularly give market updates as to how and where I think the market is actually going. But I've been doing these so far on an ad hoc basis. So today is the inaugural session that we are calling Over the Horizon, which is actually my pick on the world as to where I think that the property market is actually going, into the distant future. Now, why is that important? Reason being is that as property developers, we want to be looking at deals not just in today's market, but because our projects take time to run, we want to know the market that we're going to be selling into at some point over the horizon. And depending upon the length of our project, that could be 3 months, that could be 3 years. And so having a good view and how to read the market and knowing what market we're getting into and what market we're getting out in is really, really important for us to actually understand. Now, when we look at how most people are looking at the property market, most people are looking at it from a property investment point of view. So they're looking at it for long-term buy and hold. And so most of the commentary that you will hear in the media is all based on, those buy and hold type approaches, which may not necessarily reflect what we are looking for in our property development realm. So I'm going to give you some insights into that. Now, before doing that, I have to do a legal disclaimer. I am not a property economist. I'm not licensed to give advice. This is more educational in nature. This is my humble opinion from studying the market for many, many years. And so I encourage you to do your homework, make sure that you can validate all of the things that I actually say and that you take into account your own personal individual circumstances. That said, there's plenty of, thoughts and impacts as to where I think the market's going and why. Now, as I touched on before, the way that traditional people look at the market is based on that long-term buy and hold approach, and they tend to look at a thing called property market indicators. So an indicator is something that is really looking at events that have already passed. So number of listings, the auction clearance rates, the median house prices, those sorts of things. They're all measuring things that have already occurred. So we're looking backwards. Whereas as property developers, we want to start to look forwards. We want to start to look at market drivers. So I'm going to give you some insights into some of those market drivers and also give you my humble opinion on where I think some of those drivers are pointing us. And then, based on that, where we think the market is going to go. Now, noting that the market is a moving beast, we need to be constantly monitoring and navigating what this is about. It's never a set and forget. So anything that if you're watching this at some point in the future and looking back at this particular recording, note that it was a point in time and the market can and will change. Now, one thing that I would like to say, we are using a brand spanking new technology here called Restream in order to push all of our things in multiple directions. And as such, for me to actually see your comments, I am going, on YouTube, I'm going on LinkedIn, I'm going on Facebook, I'm going on a number of different places. And so because of that, if you want to contribute into the chat, if you are in Facebook land, if you could follow the little link that is just below, what that will do will allow your comment to then appear to me. I'll actually get to see your name, and that will help me to be a little bit more interactive with you. Now, I'm going to take on multiple questions as we go, but there's a lot of content for us to actually get through today. So very much looking forward to sharing this with you today. Now, as I said, market indicators. Now, these are, the typical ones that we'd start to see the media start to talk on would be stock availability. So the listing volume, sales volume, stock on market. There'd be things like finance approvals. So how many first home buyers, how many investors are actually getting I guess their property is actually approved. We're going to start to look at investment stocks. So what are vacancy rates and rental yields and those sorts of things. And then we're going to start to look at stock turnovers. So days on market, auction clearance rates, vendor discount rates. All of those are indicators. And as I touched on before, they are looking backwards in time. And because they are looking backwards in time, because they're going backwards in time, it's not really giving us a good insight into what's going to happen next, right? So every time you hear the media talking about it, those are the things that they are actually talking about, okay? And because it's looking backwards, I want you to think about this very logically. A person decides to do something in the market. They go, I think I'm going to sell. Then they'll spend some time, they'll prep their home for sale. Then they'll spend some more time going and talk to agents. Then they'll put their marketing campaign together. They'll start to list it. Then they go through an advertising campaign that then may result in potentially an auction. That campaign takes a while. Then it's a little while for settlement. And then settlement actually occurs. And then it takes a little while for all of these to be measured on the titles office and all of the different sales research tools. So from the point of somebody deciding to sell to the point where that has actually occurred, there's quite a bit of a lag, and that can be anywhere from, 6 weeks to 6 months, depending upon, the individual circumstances there. So every time you're looking at market indicators, note that that lag is already there. That's already been built in. And when people start to listen to the media talk and they are looking backwards in time, that then triggers the next person to then make that decision, which then has a further lag. So what you start to see is you see a bit of a snowball effect as the media starts to hype things and people then start to make decisions. That then takes a little while to actually start to roll out. And so if you're relying on indicators, then you can actually get to the point where you're making false understandings of where the future is actually going, okay, because it's always looking back. Now, if you want to have a read on what's actually happening at the market right now, so is it hot, is it not? Okay, then what you want to start to do is just look at a couple of those indicators, and they're going to give you a really good guide on this. So those couple of indicators would be, the number of sales, so how many new sales are actually occurring, and the number of listings. And so when you start to look at those two, you're going to start to see some patterns. So if you see both the sales and the listings both going up, if you start to see that, then you can tell that the market is actually confident. If you can see both of them going down, then I guess the market is quite concerned. Where it gets really interesting is where you've got the listings starting to go up and the number of sales actually starting to go down. That's when it's an indication of the market crashing. And I want you to start to think of the logic that sits actually behind this and the psyche of the people actually watching this occur. What you'll see is you'll start to see people really wanting to get the previous high price point that was in there. So they're starting to put their property on the market, and they're starting to see that the market crash, and they're going to hold that price as high as humanly possible. So you're going to start to see less and less sales because everyone's trying to hold on to that really, really high price point before it actually eventually then just starts cascading down. Okay. Now the opposite is actually true. So when you start to see the number of sales go up and the number of listings go down, that's when the market is actually booming. And what you'll find there, again, understanding the psyche of what's actually happening, everyone who has a property is actually wanting to hold on and ride that boom for as long as humanly possible. So the number of listings tends to go down because this is the time that people do want to hold because they want it to go climb really, really high. So it's where those two inflection points start to occur. So when the listings goes from down and then starts to go up. So when you start to see the listings start to flick like that, that's when people are starting to go, right, we think we've hit the top of the market. We're going to start to try and list it now before it actually tips over the edge and starts to go down. Now, my read on the market right now is when we start to have a look at that, when we start to see in Sydney, we're starting to see the number of listings starting to go down. When we see Melbourne, we're starting to see the number of listings start to come down. When we're seeing Brisbane, we see the number of listings starting to come down. So all of those are pointing to the listings coming down. And yet, when we start to see the sales volumes are starting to come up. So when we start to think about that, that's where we're actually in that's telling us that we're actually in a booming market. But we're starting to see that inflection point starting to come in. We're actually starting to see the sales actually start to slow down. Okay. Now, we all know that we're in a boom and that we've been in one for a little bit of a while. And if we start to look at what's happened in the last 12 months, Sydney median prices have gone up 18.2%. Melbourne have gone up about 10.4%. Brisbane about 15.9%. Adelaide about 15.7%, et cetera, as we roll around the country. So pretty much everywhere has gone up. But I want you to start to think about this and go, well, it actually came off a fairly low base because the previous 12 months was right in the middle of COVID and it actually went down first. So it hasn't come up as far as you would think. It's actually instead just done some recovery and then a little bit of gain. So we're not in as big a boom as everybody starts to think that we are in right now. That said, we are starting to slow. The price points have gotten up and up and up. And what we're starting to see is that growth cycle starting to taper now because the housing prices are starting to become a little less affordable. And that's largely because of the fact that from an unemployment rate perspective, whilst we are technically as employed as we, unemployment rates have actually come back to us, the nature of that employment has changed very significantly. So where we do have permanent employment, we're in this start-stop nature where we're in lockdown, we're not in lockdown, we're in lockdown, we're not in lockdown. And so there's a lot of people, I guess, holding on to their money at the moment and not spending as much as they would normally. And as a result of that, they're just starting to, say, well, now probably not the time to be going and buying an expensive property. That's going to be something that is going to ebb and flow over time. So you need to keep an eye on how and where that's actually sitting. If we look at something like the Heron Todd White National Property Clock, what it's actually saying is that we're pretty much all in a rising market and getting to the point where we're actually approaching the peak of the market where it's actually starting to slow down. Now, whenever you're looking at an indicator, right? I said before there is a lag. When you're looking at an indices, so a national property clock from Heron Todd White is an indices, it then looks at indicators themselves. So there's a lag, and then on top of that, another lag. So whenever you're looking at something like a property clock and that sort of thing, there's always going to be a little bit of a lull between what's actually happening in the market and otherwise. So that said, this is what's happening in the market today. What we really care about, though, is what's happening in the market in the future, okay? And so there's a few things in trying to understand, how to read what might be happening in the future called market drivers. Now, market drivers come across a number of different categories. And so for you to actually understand, are we moving up, down, or sideways, you need to keep an eye on many, many things within our economy and many things across the board. So it's a lot more holistic, but rather looking at the whole combination of elements and putting them together and using that assimilated data to then, form your particular opinion. So that said, where are those assimilated bits of information? Okay, so we need to start to look at four major categories, just four, okay? So there's government incentives and drivers, there's population growth, there's supply and demand, and then there's our purchasing power. And within each of those four different categories, there are some subcategories that we want to start to look at. So within government incentives and drivers, there's major infrastructure projects, both at the state and local government level. So what is actually happening? How much money is the government actually spending? How many jobs are they actually creating? That starts to attract people into the area. That's obviously a good thing. If the government is not spending money, then jobs are not attracted to the area. Then that's not a driver for growth, okay? There's other government incentives. There might be things like home builder bonuses or, job keeper, job seeker, keeping people's jobs afloat, business boosts, business incentives, things like that. Whenever there is a government incentive actually put out there, it's trying to stimulate the economy to activate the spending. And when people are starting to activate spending, they get a little bit more comfortable. They're a little bit more willing to purchase, higher asset value things such as properties, okay? Next thing we want to start to look at is population growth. So when we start to look at the elements of that, there are three elements of population growth. There's interstate migration, so within the state itself, so from the city out to the regional areas, from the regional areas into the city. There's births, deaths, and marriages, so that's just natural population increase. So, as more people are born and some people die, there's going to be a balance between those. And then there's also international migration. So when we start to look at all three of those, we start to go, well, there's more population coming into an area. If there's more population coming into an area, we can then start to determine what is the demand in that area, in which case then we need to look at, well, what's the opposite of demand, but rather the supply. So what is the supply? So when we look at those supply and demand drivers, there's development approvals. So, what has council said that they would be willing to allow to be constructed? Now, what you'll find is many development approvals never actually get constructed. Reason being for that, one, sometimes the demand isn't there. People are misreading it. Sometimes they put the wrong kind of development approval in place, wrong kind of product for that particular geography, a whole bunch of things. So when you see a development approval itself, that is not an indication of, pure supply, but rather an indication of potential supply. What happens there is at the moment it starts to actually get activated, that development approval turns into a building approval. Now, once it's at a building approval stage, now that supply actually starting to come onto market. Building approvals tend to, start very early in the process when you're trying to get your funding, and the final step is, do I actually get the finance approval to construct it? So when you look at those three elements together, development approvals tell you the potential, building approvals to say, look, this is what's actually about to break ground, and finance approvals tell you, well, this is the stuff that actually did break ground. So when you look at those together, you're going to see what is the supply actually being created, and what is the latent supply that could potentially expand and contract as things like population growth come in and actually say, well, I actually need a whole bunch more supply. So is there any slack in there? Okay. And last thing is purchasing power, things like interest rates, unemployment rates, and whatever the government's fiscal policy set by both the Reserve Bank of Australia and APRA as to how hard it is to actually get our money. Now, when we look at all of those together, what that is telling us is they're all things that are either going to encourage spending in the economy or slow down our spending in the economy. And so we want to start to have a read on all of those and start to build ourselves a little bit of a map, a little bit of a roadmap to understand whether the government is trying to encourage things to grow. If it's trying to encourage it, where is it trying to encourage it? What is just the natural, flex in the market? So as we have people coming into the area, population growth and that sort of thing, there's going to be a natural ebb and flow. We need to start to be able to read that. And then we need to say, well, how many people in a similar situation to me wanting to invest in development, how many people have actually gone and proactively done something about it? And am I competing with millions of people or just some of the people? And then lastly, the purchasing power says, well, for the people that are going to buy the finished product off of us, can they actually afford to do that? So they're the things that we're going to look at in a little bit more detail today. Okay, now, in order to understand this, what I would like to do is just kind of step back in time so we can actually go, well, if we look at where all of those things were 12 months ago, then when we compare what we think it's going into in the future, we can actually understand the dynamic between the two, and we can see clearly where one lever's been pulled, how it's actually had an impact on the other. Okay, so if we start to break those elements down, so government incentives and drivers. Okay, so if we look back 12 months ago, major infrastructure projects, well, the government was trying to spend billions and billions of dollars on massive amounts of infrastructure projects in tunnels and roads and highways and hospitals and all sorts of things in order to encourage jobs to come back into the market. And that was largely because during COVID, when everything got locked down, our economy started shrinking quite massively, and the government had to spend a whole bunch of money to try and prop us all up. Okay. In particular, they tried to do that in and around the building and construction part of the economy. Reason for that, building and construction is actually the largest employment category of any, employer in the country. So when we start to look at, just the property market in itself, between, direct employment and indirect employment, 1 in 4 people are actually somehow employed by property, in and around property. So keeping that property market propped up is actually quite important. Hence, some of the cash incentives that the government actually pushed out at that point in time was the home builder package. Now, when you see that, there was a massive uplift in the government trying to push that market up. And as a result of that, you are seeing right now booms in construction. Okay, so that is a direct result of the government spending those incentives and drivers. And so our role is to start to look at, well, if that's what they did 12 months ago in order to, kickstart that, what are they looking to do in the future? And when we start to look at that, it's, okay, are they going to continue the trend or otherwise? Now, from a very high level perspective, there is a whole bunch of major infrastructure projects that have already been commenced and are already rolling out. And if you want to look at the number of infrastructure projects that are happening, go to government website, and I'll probably get the URL wrong off the top of my head, but it's infrastructureaustralia.gov.au, and that's going to tell you all of the different major infrastructure projects that are actually being rolled out at any one particular time, so you can see what's happening and where they're going, etc. Now, so right now, those projects are in train. They're already happening. So from a continuing growth perspective, that is still an upward pressure. However, it's more of a plateau. Now, there is still going to be government incentive packages from a cash incentive perspective, keeping businesses afloat and that sort of thing whilst our lockdowns are coming and going. But it's getting to the point where the government's actually starting to run out a little bit of steam in that. And so what you're seeing now is the market actually starting to slow down. So they're not spending more and more money, but rather they're trying to do a business as usual type spend wherever humanly possible. So the next one would be population growth. Okay, so if we start to look at our population growth, remember I said there were 3 areas of population growth we actually wanted to look at. So intrastate, so that is, from CBD out to regional, interstate, and also international migration when we start to look at those. And also the fourth one being, births, deaths, and marriages. So let's start with births, deaths, and marriages. We're at an equilibrium there. Nothing has really changed in the last 12 months to the next 12 months. So that's not going to be a major driver. Some people say tongue-in-cheek that because we've been locked up for COVID for so long, there is likely to be a mini baby boom coming because we've been stuck at home with nothing else to do. So, potentially a mini baby boom coming, but that's going to hit us in 20 years' time when those people are actually turning into adults and they're needing to go out into a home at some point in the future. So watch that one in 20 years' time. Now, with regards to intrastate, we're seeing a lot of movements at the moment between, the CBD out to regional areas. But what I want to do is I want to try to start to put this into perspective. Okay, so yes, we're seeing lots of people move out there, but in proportion to the number of people that are already there. So some of these regional areas only have 100,000 people or only have 150,000 people. So when we see, an uplift of an extra 1 or 2% of people going out there, it's not a huge amount with respect to how many people stayed behind in the CBD. So yes, absolutely, there is a push into regional. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that regional is going to be, the next big thing. What we want to see is how long is that trend going to continue. So what we're seeing is a short burst at the moment, just because of the fact that people have a lot more freedom out in those regional areas with regards to the lockdown. So what I would like to see is keep an eye on that with regards to, is that going to be a short-term blip or is that a long-term trend? So we need to keep an eye on that one as we go. Similarly, interstate migration. What we've seen in particular, Victoria and New South Wales, with the number of lockdowns that they've actually had, has caused a lot of interstate migration, and the interstate migration has seen movements largely to two states. So South Australia and Queensland have been the large winners out of those two, where people are starting to, pack up and move to those areas. Now, that's not, unanticipated. There's been a lot of migration specifically to southeast Queensland for quite some time. It's just really started to accelerate a little bit. Again, putting it in perspective, it's not massive, but it is enough to actually notice that that trend is actually starting to happen. So that blip we want to keep an eye on, and where we see that blip starting to have a long-term continual trend, that's where it's going to give us some really good insights as to, is there areas such as Adelaide, such as Brisbane, that we want to start to concentrate on how and where we want to go do our projects. The big killer is really, when we start to look at this, is international migration. Now, international migration, with our borders closed, international migration has meant that our population growth has not grown as rapidly as it could. Now, what many people don't realize is we are actually a country of migrants, and the majority of our population growth actually occurs because of international migration. It is a massive, massive, massive component of our natural population growth as we bring in skilled migrants to take on a whole bunch of work. Now, what that's meant, if we look back in time during COVID, when we start to lock down, we had a massive hole in our population growth, which is why the building and construction area started to slow down, because there was no increase in demand. So the construction industry started to shrink. And so the government said, well, we can't, because construction industry is 1/4 of our, employment, we need to artificially boost that. Hence the job builder, the home builder package kind of reinflated that particular market. So when you look at them in isolation, you kind of go, yeah, I understand. But when you start to look at them together, you go, okay, I understand. The lack of population meant that construction industry started to shrink, which meant that government had to do the incentives. When they did that, then the construction industry started to grow again, which means that construction boom that we're in right now is a little bit of an artificial boom caused by the fact that we don't have our borders open at the moment. Now, what that means is when our borders do open, we need to, then that's when our true boom is actually going to potentially come along. Now, that element in itself means when will that occur? Well, we've got to start to look at things like, what's our COVID rollout? They're not going to open borders up at all. At the moment, we've got borders locked down within states, let alone trying to open up international borders. Now, because of this, and because of the fact that all these lockdowns have been crippling the economy and then reinflating and then crippling and then reinflating, the National Cabinet, which is all the state leaders, have gotten together and they've actually built themselves a COVID roadmap in order to actually get out, and they've rolled that out to say, when we reach certain milestones, that's when we're going to actually start to start to relax some of the restrictions. And hence you're seeing a massive, massive push at the moment with regards to vaccinations. Now, whether you believe in vaccinations or not, I'm not going to get into the politics of that because I know that is quite a controversial topic. But what I would say is that until there is at least, a 70% vaccination rate, the relaxation on the internal borders is not going to happen real soon. When we get to the 80% mark, that's then going to start to relax the international borders. Now, when we start to relax the international borders, then we're actually going to start to see our true population growth start to come back, which is then going to put some demand back onto us, which then is going to push an upward driver on us. Now, based on the rollout plan, what they're predicting is that we will reach that 70 to 80% milestone, towards the end of the year. And they're looking, once they've gone through a whole bunch of sanity checks, as a worst case scenario, they're looking at June next year to start to reopen those borders, the international borders. So at that point in time, our population growth is going to start to reinflate. Now, as a very lay opinion on that, what you'll find is that because Australia has weathered the storm of COVID quite well, we've always been a destination of choice for people. And so we're going to still be a very high destination of choice because we've weathered the storm of COVID quite well. And so there's going to be a lot of people wanting to come here over and above what we had before. And more specifically, a backlog of people who haven't been able to get here for the last 18 months. So there's going to be a huge demand actually starting to come through and potential for a spike in population over and above our normal norms as it tries to recover that lag that was actually sitting there some time ago. Now, that's which means that when that demand comes, the question is there supply for them? So I'm going to touch on the supply and demand drivers in a sec, which is probably a really good segue to actually go into that right now. So when we look at the supply and demand drivers, as I said before, development approvals is the potential supply. So development approvals, if we go back in time well before COVID, we actually had an oversupply in the market because we had a fairly good run, and a whole bunch of developers said, well, it's a really good idea. We should get a whole bunch of stock ready to go. And we actually got an oversupply of approvals actually come through, most of which didn't actually come to fruition. So in 2018, just through natural economic forces, the oversupply was such that many developers said, well, I'm just not going to put any applications in. So around about the start of 2018, the number of applications started to dwindle off. Then we went into COVID times, into lockdowns, and the market started to fall. The banks were predicting that the sky was falling, that we were going to drop anywhere from 20 to 30% in the market rate. So a lot of developers, I guess, continued to not put applications in. So 2018, very few applications. 2019, very few applications. Sorry, I probably got my years wrong there. But then it continued. So we've got a massive lull in that potential supply. Okay. Then we got into COVID and our economy started to shrink. Our construction industry started to shrink, and the government said, right, we're going to kick off these home builder packages. Then because of that, the building approvals suddenly went and shot through the roof and consumed a lot of the excess slack, the surplus slack that was sitting in those development approvals. And so what we've got is a lull in development applications and development approvals coming through, and then a spike in building approvals actually consuming all of that, which means that there's a massive mismatch with the number of potential sites that are actually going to come available as that rolls through the pipeline. Remember, development approvals typically stay alive for about anywhere between 2 and 4 years, depending upon the state that you're actually in. And so there's that missing hole is actually going to start to travel through time till they start to naturally expire at just the right time when the population growth is going to start to hit us again. And so there's a potential that we're going to have an undersupply of stock and an oversupply of people, potentially a spike in that. And so what we're seeing before with regards to, I guess, our current boom being, I guess, driven by, I guess, government incentives and drivers and more artificial in nature, this boom that's going to come in the future, the one I call COVID 2.0, that COVID boom 2.0 is going to be based on true fundamentals. Okay, that's a true supply and demand, but noting that true supply and demand has been triggered by some artificial events, being the fact that COVID kind of got in the middle of us and kind of skewed all of those things and created a perfect tsunami of opportunity that's potentially going to come through. Then the last thing will be, well, whilst that demand might be there and the lack of supply might be there, can people actually afford to purchase these things? So the purchasing power of, I guess, the ultimate buyer to take this stock off of us. Now, We need to look at interest rates, unemployment rates, and Australia's fiscal policy with regards to whether or not people can actually get hold of any money to purchase. Now, right now, interest rates are at an all-time low. We've got a cash rate of 0.1%, and it's not been that low for very, I guess, on record ever. And so when we start to look at, I guess, predictions, what they call future predictions for the Reserve Bank of Australia. Sorry, that's not the exact name they call it, and it'll come to me, but the forward projections, they call it. So when they start to look at forward projections, the Reserve Bank of Australia says they can't see them raising interest rates until at least 2024, until they see, I guess, the inflation rate target come back to within our normal range that we're trying to aim for, which is between 2 and 3%, which it has not been for many, many years. We've actually been struggling to kickstart our economy for a while, which is why our interest rates have been so low. So, which means that from a purchasing power perspective, interest rates are going to be cheap for some time, which means that people potentially can actually start to purchase. Now, unemployment rates, we had a record unemployment rate during COVID. That has come back to the norm because JobSeeker, JobKeeper kept people's jobs alive, kept people's businesses afloat. But there's a lot of businesses that are still struggling at the moment. And so we don't quite know when we get back to normality whether or not some of these businesses are still afloat just because of the government incentives keeping there, or whether or not they're back to normality. So when you see press releases saying, look, our economy is quite healthy, well, on paper it is, but there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. And I guess while there's uncertainty, businesses don't want to invest. They don't want to employ more people because they just don't know whether or not their doors are going to be open. Hence, another reason why, I guess, the COVID, vaccination rollouts are so important to give certainty back to that business market to say, well, if I'm going to invest in people, I want to know that there's actually going to be someone to come and buy my stock. And if they're locked up at home and can't actually get to the shops in order to buy my product, then why would I actually spend a whole bunch of money trying to invest in my business? So another reason why that COVID vaccine rollout is going to be one of the critical measures of success that you want to determine. At what point will the economy start to return back to a pseudo equilibrium where it's not artificial start, stop that's actually causing everything to actually happen? Okay. So unemployment rates at the moment are back to normal. However, the nature of that unemployment rate is very different to where it was previously, which means that whether they're more permanent employment or whether or not they're casual or part-time, I guess the nature of those roles have actually changed quite significantly. So you want to start to look at not just the unemployment rates, but also the hours that are actually being consumed in employment. Okay, so sometimes people are technically working, but maybe they're only working 1 day a week. Okay, so they're not technically unemployed, but the hours that they're working have gone massively. So you want to keep a really close eye on that. As soon as our unemployment rate starts to stabilize and the number of working hours starts to stabilize, that's going to give people confidence to be able to go out and spend again. Low interest rates means that they know that confidence that interest rate will stay low for quite some time. So when you start to see those things start to come back into alignment, that's going to be the key to say, rightio, I'm actually willing to buy more property now at this point. And then lastly, you want to start to look at, both the Reserve Bank of Australia and APRA and what sort of, fiscal policies they're actually putting in place to encourage or discourage lending. Now, at this point in time, everything that they're doing is trying to open everything up and say, everyone can borrow money. We're going to make it as easy as humanly possible. And I don't see any reason why that's going to change for quite some time. I guess they tend to start to close those things down when the market is going way too fast. But at this moment in time, we're really, really slow. So they're trying to open it up as humanly possible. So when I look across the board, on average, we've got about 5 of our core drivers that are pushing in upwards direction. We've got 4 of our core drivers that are kind of maintaining equilibrium. We've only got one of our driver that is starting to, I guess, push down, and because of that. Sorry, let me correct that. So we've got. So I was looking at the wrong slide. Sorry, we've got 6 of our drivers that are pushing up, 5 of ours pushing at equilibrium. So we haven't really got any negative drivers pushing down when we start to forward project about 12 months out from now. Now we always have to try and look ahead, I guess, as far as we can every 12 months, but we need to look at all of the media releases and that sort of thing that the government are doing today, that the RBA are doing, that APRA are doing. I guess we've just done a census. When we start to see all of these different government institutions trying to gather data for us and give us the information, we need to start to assimilate all of that together. So long and the short of it, guys, is where my humble opinion on the market moving forward. Right now, we have been in a boom, but that boom has been artificially created, okay? It's been based on the fact that we had massive unemployment during COVID. Government then, construction industry shrank. We had the government incentives push that up to try and reinflate the market. So home builder created a whole bunch of opportunity, which created an artificial boom with regards to the number of jobs and the number of activity and people trying to buy a whole bunch of, I guess, house and land packages, which then consumed a whole bunch of latent supply that was actually sitting in our, or surplus supply, I should say, that was sitting in the pipeline for all our development approvals. But the number of development approvals that were sitting there were actually pretty low to start with, which means that it's consumed the excess. So, which means that right now we've got not much surplus of potential stock coming through the market. Now, as we start to open the borders up, as we get our vaccination rates and that sort of thing up, that's going to start to hit us in the future as our population starts to come in, and the demand is going to then start to outstrip the ability for supply to actually meet. Now, whilst all of that is happening, the government is trying to make it as affordable as humanly possible for people to actually purchase the stock, which means that we have a massive, massive potential for, I guess, a second wave of boom. Okay, what I call COVID boom 2.0, second wave of boom to actually hit us, which might be anywhere from 12 to 18 months before that actually starts to actually kick in. Now, that's a hypothesis that I've got at the moment, which I think is based on a whole bunch of really strong, I guess, drivers in the market sitting there. Now, we always have to keep an eye on those drivers, make sure that they're always staying up to date, that they are staying current, etc. So, I guess that's kind of my view on where we're going at the moment. So if I was to try and crystal ball as to how and where we're going right now, we're at a tipping point. We're at the crest of the current artificial boom. Market's starting to slow. We're going to start to come back to equilibrium. Now, do I think we're going to come? Do I think we're going to regress back? No, I think we're just going to kind of naturally fall back into a very slow decline rather than a really fast decline as we just try to re-find our new equilibrium. Then in 12 to 18 months, I think that second wave is actually going to hit. So there you have it, folks. That is my view on the world. Remember, I am not an economist. I am not qualified to actually give you advice. This is my humble opinion on my market research and what I have found. So I encourage you to go out and do your own research and make sure that you find that, I guess, the same sorts of indicators yourself, same sort of indicators and drivers yourself. Make sure that I guess, supports your particular situation. That said, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go to the audience and see whether or not there's actually any questions coming through. Now, as I did say before, because we are pushing this out to multiple channels through a technology called Restream. If you are in Facebook land and you want to participate in the chat at all, if you could, I guess, follow that link and grant Restream some permissions, that will then give me the ability to see, I guess, your chat and also the ability for me to actually comment and display that. So let's see who's out there and actually asking questions. So I'm seeing lots of people saying hi, thank you. Lots of people saying happy Sunday. Felicity says the link for letting your comments show up is, thank you, Felicity, for sharing that link. Sanders says, hi, Rob. With all these lockdowns, what is your comment on development? There's a little bit more to that question, I think. I think I've just given that, Sanders, is that I think that from a development perspective, we have I guess, a huge amount of potential for what is actually coming up for us. There's going to be a short period where, because of that artificial boom, we've got vendors' expectations quite high. We'll potentially be selling into a much, into a slightly depressed market in the shorter term. But if you've got a longer term view on that, what you're going to find is that as the market starts to soften off, vendors are going to become a little bit more flexible with the terms because they want to hold that high price point that we just had from this artificial boom. As the market's starting to soften, they're going to start to relax their expectations about unconditional sales, and they're going to start to become very flexible with regards to how they start to navigate their deals. So great time to do no money down type strategies. And I guess then we're going to kick off a little bit in 18 months time is kind of where I think that. So Linda says, bit dusty a little bit, Linda, but I'm doing okay. I think I've managed this quite well. Deborah says, keeps freezing. I think that's a technology problem at your end, Deb. So Jerry says, also seeing the less migration from regional to cities boosting regional population. Absolutely, there is regional migration for sure, but as I touched on before, you want to make sure that you're putting that into perspective. And when you put that into perspective, you'll recognize that the size of those regional areas are quite small. And so when you see a spike in regional as a percentage, it's a percentage off a very low base to start with. So make sure that we're looking at actual numbers. So was it 1,000 people that moved there? Was it 2,000 people that moved there? If it was, let's just say hypothetically that it was 2,000 people, the average number of people that occupy a dwelling in Australia is 2.6. So when you divide that 2,000 people by 2.6, it's only about 850 actual homes that has actually gone up. So that, it's not a huge amount of demand, and that's spread across many regions, not just one region. Okay, so you want to be very careful to make sure that we actually grab that properly. Now, next question. Jerry says, COVID 2.0 boom on its way. Absolutely. Katie says, I'm working from home, small development projects. I'm not quite sure I understand the question there, Katie. It seems more of a statement that you're doing small developments from home. So if I got that wrong, please feel free to just redo your question and I'll see what I can do for that. Jerry says, any ideas on the impact of inflation rates being 2 to 3 times higher than salary growth, people struggling to get into property? Jerry, what I'll talk to here is there's some really good explainers on the Reserve Bank of Australia website if anyone wants to go and actually look at this. But Reserve Bank of Australia aim to have an on average inflation rate of between 2 and 3%, which is just high enough to make sure that there is certainty that the market is not going to collapse and to encourage wage growth to actually occur. But they've actually set that target way back in the 70s that they want to have that 2 to 3% mark, and have always been trying to manage us within that 2 to 3% range ever since. That said, the last 6 or 7 years, they've actually struggled to get us into that range. We're well below that inflation rate target. And because of that, our economy has been, whilst performing well, not performing to the standard that the Reserve Bank are actually aiming for. So they've been trying, that's why the interest rates have been coming down and down and down and down for so long. So they're trying to kickstart that back into there. Now, Reserve Bank of Australia, I'm trying to think what his name is, Philip Lowe, has stated the reason why they want to keep those interest rates low is to get us back to that inflationary target, to get wage growth happening again, because when wage growth happens, it means that we all are earning more money, which means we all get paid more tax. And when we pay more tax, it means that we can actually pay back the debt for all the money the government has just printed trying to re-stimulate the economy. So it's actually quite important that wage growth actually does occur, but they're going to try and make sure they constrain that within the bounds of that 2 to 3% mark. Vijan says, was there a mastermind session yesterday at the end of the Real Deals? No, there was not, Vijan, because of the fact that it was our 9th birthday and our presenters ran a little bit long. There was not one, mate. So K Wong says, hi, Rob. So you mentioned COVID boom 2.0. Is it going to boom? What is the... but we are at the tipping point now. So K Wong, I'm going to try and re-articulate this for you, mate. We are at the crest of an artificial boom right now that is being driven by government incentives. And that market is starting to soften. So we're actually coming over the crest and starting to come down. What I'm calling COVID boom 2.0 is where the genuine market drivers are going to kick into gear. And at that point, whilst we come over the edge, we're going to then shoot up the other side. Now, we've got to keep a really close eye on when that's actually going to occur. Now, are we over the top of the crest at the moment, or are we just approaching the top of the crest? I guess that's the hard part. Nobody can actually ever pick the exact moment it actually happened while we're in the moment. All we can actually do is look back and go, yep, it has already occurred. But all of the indicators are saying, look, we're starting to slow. Sales are starting to slow. Things are starting to get to the point where people are actually a little bit concerned. Now, it's not yet started to drop off, but the indicators there saying that it possibly will. Okay. Okay, Katie's saying, it wasn't a question, sorry, autocorrect, all good. Jerry's saying wage growth / tax dollars when international borders open and we get more workers paying taxes and spending money. Again, that looks like a statement, not a question, Jerry, so I'm just going to leave that at that. Now, looks like I've got a question coming from YouTube, so not sure how to pronounce this. Is it Sadiq? Hi, Rob. Thank you for sharing your opinion with us. Sunshine Coast prices have already doubled in a matter of less than 10 years. I believe that we are almost at the peak. Sadiq, I'm gonna suggest that looking back is not what you need to do. You need to start to look forward, okay? What are the drivers that are actually sitting there right now? Now, Sunshine Coast had a whole bunch of drivers that were driving it over those 10 years. There was some massive highway upgrades. There was massive hospitals being built, universities going in the near area. There was a whole bunch of things that were actually pushing the last 10 years in order to get to there. What you now want to go with, hence why you've seen the growth, okay? What you now want to go is what's happening from now moving forward, okay? So what are the infrastructure projects that are happening? Are there any more? Now, if there's no infrastructure projects, then you're going to start to see less jobs being created. Less jobs being created means less people actually wanting to move there. So all of those things, those drivers, they're the keys that you want to touch on, mate. So go have a look at that. Further comment from Sadiq says, expats return also has an impact on house prices in regional areas, especially high-end properties. Expats returning absolutely will have an impact. However, the number of expats, again, make sure it's a percentage that you're actually looking at. The number of expats that are actually out there when we look at population of Australia is actually relatively low. So they'll only have a relatively minor impact on that. But, it's all of the, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, a little bit of that. And when you look at all of it on whole, that's how you're looking at the market. So rather than just one thing individually. Lee says, hi, Rob, great insights on the market and forecasting tonight. Where do you find the macro data on number of development approvals in terms of supply and demand? Great session. Lee, Australian Bureau of Statistics has a whole bunch of these information for you, mate, but there is literally, I'm going to say, 50 or 60 different sources that I regularly check on to try and gather all of that. So it's not just a single source. I could probably do a good 4 or 5 hour session just on showing you all the different sources that I actually grab my data from. If you grab information from just one source, then it has some information and relevancy, but you need to gather it from many sources. And when you gather it from many sources, it's now the accumulative impact of all of that. So something happened. What was the impact that had on something else? Can I see that reflection? Start to build hypotheses on, okay, I can see something that happened to the data. I have a hypothesis it would have done this. Then go prove your hypothesis. Look for evidence that actually occurred. If that occurred, that's going to build your strength in the ability to start to read the market. So do more and more of that as you go. And Sadiq says, thank you very much, Rob. Very much appreciated. Very welcome. Well, there we are, folks. That looks like it. That is us pretty much on the hour. So thank you all for, your attendance today. As I touched on, these sessions here over the horizon, we're now going to do these quarterly so that you guys get some insights into where I think the market is actually going, and more specifically, giving you, I guess, the education that you need to say, well, how and where do I actually go to try and put some of this together? Again, make sure you do your own homework. I guess this is all my opinion, and it's highly encouraged that you guys educate yourselves so that you can actually form your own opinion too, and go and do all the things that you need to do in order to be very successful in your career. So I'm going to say thank you, everybody, for your participation today. Been a great session, and I look forward to not only another year, but another 9 years with you guys. I'm going to be here for a very long time. Thanks, folks. Till next time. Bye for now.